Determined to take the refuges and the precepts. นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิทัตติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิทัตติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิทัตติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิทัตติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิทัตติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิทัตติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิทิสารณคัมมนังนิธิตังปานาติปาตาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิปานาติปาตาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิปาทินาทานาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิปาทินาทานาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิภาเมสุมิชฌาจาราเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิภาเมสุมิชฌาจาราเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิมุสาวาทาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิมุสาวาทาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิสุราเมรยมัจจธัมมาดัฏฐานาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิสุราเมรยมัจจธัมมาดัฏฐานาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิอิมานิปัญจสิกขาปทานิสีเลนะสุขติยันติสีเลนะโภคสัมปดาสีเลนะนิพุติยันติทัสสมาสีลังวิโสทะเยนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ So I can just allow the mind to be comfortable, peaceful. You've already sat meditation. Hopefully that helped. And just to let the various teachings or ideas that I present, just let them wash over you without trying to analyze about it too much, think about it too much, and see if anything sticks. I'm actually intrigued by the idea of giving a talk on dependent origination for dummies, so I might give a stab at it. And because it's something in Buddhist teachings, philosophy, it can be considered something that's very, very complicated and difficult. I can actually remember when I was a university student a long time ago, and studying, my first exposure to Buddhism was through a Eastern religions course, and then it, of course, that was late 1960s, and I went to university in a small, fairly small city in the middle of Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba, and went to University of Winnipeg, which is a small university in Winnipeg. And so not much, they certainly did not have much of a religions faculty, and certainly didn't have a Buddhist faculty. And the person who was teaching the Eastern religions course had been a Christian missionary, and was making a good stab at presenting this. And when he got to the dependent origination, he sort of said, I don't have any idea what this is actually about, but it's supposed to be important. and that kind of tweaked my lazy, shortcut mind that said, if I write a paper on dependent origination, they've got to get decent marks for it because the prof doesn't know anything about it. So I did. I wrote a paper on dependent origination, and it stimulated my ideas and appreciation of the Buddhist teachings, and it was lots of stuff was percolating for me, and so that was an early introduction to dependent origination. And it's, if you look at for those who aren't familiar, dependent origination is it's the causal relationships of how as human beings we progress from ignorance and lack of true knowledge to suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So the whole sort of gamut of how we sense contact and the sense faculties and the sort of the makeup of the human being and the presence and activation of desire and attachment and clinging. But it's a cycle of causes and conditions, and of course that actually underlies a very, very important principle of the Buddhist teachings, is that all things arise from a cause. And when anything ceases, it's because the cause ceases. Everything is working on. We don't live in a random universe. Everything is following patterns of causes and conditions, and those causes and conditions can be quite complicated, but it's helpful to have a sense of there are basic structures of how things are progressing or working or underlying the seemingly random nature of our existence. There actually are these fundamental causes that are taking place, and the Buddha points to two basic, say, problems in the human condition. One is avijja, which means usually translated as ignorance, but it really means lack of true knowledge. And the other is desire. Desire meaning, it's a technical term in terms of desire that's rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So that those are, because there's actually a different word meaning desire in terms of motivation or interest, so that there's positive sort of forces of desire, but any desire that's rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion will take you in a fairly direct course to dissatisfaction and suffering. So it's an underlying principle of the Buddha's teachings. So that sense of there are these causal conditions, and the teachings of the Buddha are to give us a handle on that, so that we can understand more clearly, well, what do we do with it? How do we work with that? How do we live with these seemingly complex relationships of causes and conditions? Because if you think in terms of, say, causes and conditions, in terms of mathematics, if you've got, I think it's two, like in Mandelbrot sets, in mathematics, you've only got two kind of variables, and it spins out innumerable patterns that's what those images from the Mandelbrot sets are generated from a fairly limited range of causes and conditions, and dependent originations, because it's 12 links, so that the possibilities are quite endless. But again, it's where it's important to get the fundamental principle that when we put causes and conditions that are grounded in, say, lack of true knowledge or desire, then we're gonna create trouble for ourselves, and that's a fixed course. And the opposite, of course, is true as well, in the sense when we are able to apply knowledge and understanding and clarity, and a sense of relinquishment and unselfishness, those causes are going to result in happiness and well-being. And it's a fundamental principle. And it's my teacher, Ajahn Chah, when he was asked about dependent origination, he said, well, dependent origination is actually pretty simple. He said it's like falling out of a tree. He said, you don't have to count all the branches on the way down. You just know when you hit the bottom, it's going to hurt. So that, all these different sort of links of dependent origination and all these sort of details of the process are, there's some benefit to knowing it, but the principle that, yeah, when you hit the bottom, it's going to hurt. You'd be figuring out, how am I going to soften that landing? So that the teachings are there to give a handle on that and give options, giving us options on how to deal with that. When the Buddha speaks of dependent origination or these causal principles, then it's interesting to notice that again, there's causes and conditions going both ways, and so one wants to recognize, because there's like an idiom that comes up in the scriptures over and over again, where it's bound by ignorance and obstructed by craving. And that's the human condition. So that sense of, as long as we're still bound by ignorance, obstructed by craving, there's going to be something problematic looming on the horizon. So that learning how to recognize, well, where does that come from? How do we work with that? What are the tools that we can rely on? And I know, of course, that's what the development of mindfulness and meditation, those are the tools that we have for starting to recognize, well, what are the effects that I'm receiving and what are the causes I'm putting in? And as we practice meditation and develop mindfulness, starting to tune in to our experience and learning how to recognize more clearly, well, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? Because oftentimes it's a jumble of emotions or reactions, of thinking and proliferating, and to be able to find an anchor that we start to get some clarity, so that you can start to see, well, what is this causal process that's happening? And that one of the tools that we use, of course, is mindfulness of breathing. And mindfulness of breathing is a kind of a part or a subset of mindfulness of the body. It's learning how to be mindful of our bodies and trying to have an anchor for creating a continuity of awareness and mindfulness. I live in the north of 2.5 hours north of San Francisco, and from time to time we go into the city for work. Once a month in Berkeley we give a public talk, and Berkeley's a great place for good bumper stickers. There was a car with a bumper sticker that I noticed. I said, if I lived in my body, I'd be home by now. which is a great sort of reminder, because that's so much of our time is just not connected, not rooted, not grounded in the experience of where we are, what we're doing, how we're feeling, and what is actually going on. So that the mindfulness grounded in the body is a very helpful tool for establishing a point of clarity And so in day-to-day activity, in our engagement in the world around us, really learning how to be rooted in an awareness or presence within our bodies. Because again, it's sort of this sense of having an anchor for a continuity of attention. Because it's so easy to get pulled in different distractions, different reactions and impulses, and to be, and just even having that simple awareness of what we're doing, where we're walking. I mean, Bangkok is a place where you have to have mindfulness of walking. You know, if you have to walk on the sidewalks here, streets, every morning we go an alms round, and when you're in Bangkok, you really have to have mindfulness of where you are, because everybody knows how many obstacles there are. And I can remember years ago when Ajahn Chah, my teacher, was still alive and teaching, and of course many Westerners would come and study with him and live at the monastery. And it's a forest monastery, so that there's paths through the forest. Will have there'll be roots and rocks and things, and inevitably the Westerners were always showing up with bandages on their feet and sores that where they left they tripped over some stump or something, and just through lack of mindfulness. And this is meditators supposed to be, because sometimes meditation can be just up in your head all the time and thinking about meditation. It's a great pastime. So then, remember Ajahn Chah sort of bemused sort of look on his face, and having all these Westerners from different places coming, and I said, John, these Westerners, they're sure intelligent. A lot of us had university degrees, and those Westerners, they're sure intelligent, but their feet are sure stupid. Because again, it's not having that fundamental awareness. Where am I? What am I doing? What's my relationship to the world around me? And that's where you have to begin with that as your ground, in order to start to make a connection with the causal processes that are going on around you anyway. Whether you're aware of it or not, that's the way nature functions, is causes and conditions produce results. And then the point of course, of awareness and mindfulness and wisdom is to be able to start making some wise choices of the causes and conditions that we're either agreeing to or acquiescing with, or maybe even getting proactive and deciding something skillfully. So it's interesting to reflect on the most common teaching that most people would know about would be, say, the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. And in the Four Noble Truths, suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering, path leading to cessation of suffering. And for many people, hearing that at first, they said, wow, that's pretty heavy. It's all about suffering. But again, it's sort of looking at, well, actually, it's pointing to causes and results, in the sense that there is a cause to suffering and the result is the suffering itself. And there is a cause to the cessation of suffering, and then there's the causes that we need to put in. So that one aspect is recognizing that, say, the aspect of suffering or dissatisfaction, discontent, stress, the different translations of that word, are there's something that it grabs our attention. That's because there isn't anybody who sort of hopes for the experience of suffering, looking for it. There's a great quote by Marcel Proust. Said, "The mind aspires to truth and beauty, but suffering we obey. For pain we obey." And it's sort of it's sort of that pain that grabs our attention, and so that the Buddha is using that as a tool for grabbing our attention, because it's something that we don't want, and we want to be free from. And then it's also interesting to reflect on that the path that the Buddha lays out of the Eightfold Path, which is usually sort of shortened under the headings of virtue, meditation, and wisdom. All of those aspects are actually a cause of well-being, of happiness. And as we live a life of virtue, then say at the very least, it's something that we don't have to regret. Excuse me. And if with that sense of non-remorse, there's an opportunity for ease. That ease is very, very helpful. And but then also on the positive side or characteristic of virtue is that it creates a fundamental basis of trust. If we live together as human beings with a foundation of virtue, then we can live together with a sense of trust, and that's a great sense of happiness. And there's also there's a discourse where the Buddha points to, he said there's 5 great gifts that one can give as a human being. And I said, what are those 5? And usually when people think of a great gift, then it's usually some material gift or something. But the Buddha points to just the 5 precepts, of which we say non-killing, non-stealing, refraining from sexual misconduct, restraint in speech, and then restraint around intoxicants. And he said those are 5 great gifts because they give the gift of safety. So it's like an act of compassion to give that space of safety and ease to other beings as well. So that there's a happiness that comes from being able to give that quality of trust and well-being and acting out of compassion. So that's a source of happiness. meditation is a source of happiness. Although when the mind settles, when the mind is, there's a consistent quality of mindfulness and awareness, a sense of continuity of clarity. The mind is really at ease. It's a real source of happiness, and it's something that one needs to pay attention to, but it's also helpful to, because I think as most of us, I think whether we're Buddhists, grown up in a Buddhist culture or not, there's a certain kind of mystique or idea that we have that if we're interested in meditation, then there's a sense of, when I get my meditation together, then I'm going to be happy. And that's it's a really good thing to be diligent in meditation, because it's going to make me happy. And but actually, the Buddha didn't teach like that. And what the Buddha said, he said, get your happiness together, and your meditation will start going good. And that's a really interesting concept, in the sense of, learn how to establish a sense of happiness that is not one in particular that is not grounded in, let's say, sensual indulgence or sensual gratification, chasing after that kind of excitement or stimulation, but the kind of happiness that comes from things, say, like virtue, or there's other aspects that the Buddha points to, say, like faith or confidence, so that by reflecting, studying, practicing, training, and but bringing it back into the heart, so that one is sort of that there's a recollection of, is it establishing a sense of confidence in the teachings, confidence in the practice, and confidence in that process of the causal nature of our existence, and so that with that quality of faith and confidence, there's a sense of happiness that comes from that. There's also the Buddha points to this wise reflection, skillful investigation of the skillful attention, paying attention to things in an appropriate way or skillful way. In the scriptural language, the Buddha uses the word yoniso manasikara, and that's it's like wise attention, skillful reflection, really applying the mind in appropriate ways, and that because it's our attention is so easily kind of hijacked or just pulled off in so many different directions, and to be able to sustain attention to those things which are actually useful, beneficial, that aren't agitating or confusing. So that wise attention and reflection on things, thinking things through carefully, that is a source of happiness, because one gains a sense of clarity, and that brings a real quality of well-being. And the Buddha sort of walks people through, as say, from with these different causes and conditions, there's the arising of well-being. With that well-being as a cause, and it's a condition for the arising of joy. With the joy as as a cause and condition, and it's for the arising of tranquility, with tranquility as the cause and conditions for the arising of happiness. And oftentimes in the discourses, the Buddha will actually stop there and say, the happy mind is easily concentrated. So that sense of being able to pay attention to, well, what is it that actually is conducive to happiness and well-being, that really allows the mind and the heart to be at ease. So that these aspects of virtue, of meditation, of wisdom, wisdom in the Buddhist sense of things is not necessarily some accumulation of great learning and great knowledge externally, but learning how to, it's like Ajahn Chah, my teacher, saying, learning how to read the heart, learning how to read your own heart. And because, say, like, my teacher Ajahn Chah didn't have a whole lot of worldly knowledge, didn't have a lot of worldly education. In fact, he grew up at a time when public education was only just beginning in the countryside in the northeast of Thailand, and he actually managed to finish grade 1, and that was it. But by the end of his life, then people were coming from all over Thailand, all over the world, to study with him, to learn from him. But it wasn't any kind of book knowledge that he was passing on. He was passing on, learning how to read the heart, understanding one's own being. And that kind of wisdom is just the wisdom of understanding what is it that's conducive to happiness, what is it that's conducive to suffering, what is it that is of benefit, what is actual drawback, seeing that clearly. What's skillful, what's unskillful. That's the fundamental basis of Buddhist wisdom. And so it's not something sort of high and elevated out of anybody's reach. It's within our own experience, and really being able to pay attention to that, learn from that, understand it, and those aspects of say attention, reflection, investigation, when we pay attention in skillful ways, and we're fostering and supporting our own wisdom, and that's just a great source of happiness, because that's one of the things that we start to learn or gain confidence in, is that that's something that sort of, it gives us an independence in that, somebody says, this teaching, this practice, this idea, this view, this philosophy, whatever, that's the only true thing and nothing else is true. You've got the tools of investigating through your own experience, well, what is it that leads to happiness and what is it that leads to suffering? And that's your bottom line. Because it doesn't matter how, say, abstruse a philosophy is, if it still leads to suffering, what's the point? It doesn't matter how intelligent somebody is, if it just ends up complicating your life, what's the point? So that sense of being able to seeing clearly and being able to draw back to, what is it that leads to clarity and stability, happiness and well-being? That's the point of Buddhism, and that's the point of, say, like, dependent origination. understanding causes and conditions, understanding, well, what is it that actually leads to the things that one is trying to avoid, that is suffering, and seeing that clearly, understanding its nature, and having the clarity of mind, the clarity of heart, to actually not get entangled in it. Because, I mean, that's a whole other story in the sense we can see it, but then we fall for it so often again. I mean, it's like we're suckers for suffering. I say, how did I do this again? I can't believe it. I thought I saw that clearly. And but then that's also when you realize that's why the path of practice is there. Because a theory, an idea, a nice sort of philosophy is it's okay, but you need to have a path of practice. You need to have the tools. And I think that's what, personally, what I sort of was drawn to quite immediately was, wow, here's a real set of tools that I can cultivate and develop. And I think that's what's kept me practicing and kept me in the ropes for a long time. So I'll offer that for reflection this evening and open it up for questions.
You can use the method if you have a question, shout it out and I'll repeat it. I'll shorten it for a little and repeat it so that everybody can hear it clearly. Can we turn off the bit there? So if anybody has a question to ask. A real example of dependence origination, of how you go from ignorance to suffering. For example, hearing gossip or seeing something that disturbs the mind. Yeah, I remember I was explaining in one of these Forest Yeltsin, how you got from Boris Yeltsin to suffering.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense of one is having that fundamental foundation of it's not understanding the true nature of suffering. So that's your fundamental ignorance. In that sense, is not just a lack of a piece of knowledge, but it's being steeped in a lack of real understanding. And then, of course, the processes of the mind and the mind-body complex are grounded in that. Then if that's your foundation, then you experience sense impingement. So somebody says something critical about you, and you hear that. What comes up is a feeling, which is an unpleasant feeling. The unpleasant feeling is in a source of desire, which the desire is one of aversion, annihilation, aversion, not wanting it to be that way. That not wanting it to be that way is then sort of further complicated by attachment and clinging, which would be sort of clinging to self, clinging to the mood itself, the desire that comes up around it, so that there's this tightening around it. That creates a sense of solidifying the sense of being a person who's being attacked, and then that sort of results in a full-blown experience of suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair as a separate, distinct individual. So that whole process of birth is taking birth in the present moment of of a being who's, this is who I am. I'm being attacked. I'm being, and that's also where, again, you can unravel that through that causal process of saying, looking on it in different ways, of saying, well, why do I have to? It's like, again, an example from Ajahn Chah, where, say, like in Thailand, if somebody calls you a dog, I mean, that's about as bad as it gets. And he said, so for Ajahn Chah, giving the example, if somebody calls you a dog, normally that would be a source of great anger. He says, well, all you have to do is just look and see if you've got a tail. Got a tail? If you don't have a tail, then why do you have to believe them? And then sort of unraveling the ignorance and the desire and the reaction and the reactivity and the sense of me being somebody who's being attacked. Because it doesn't take much for us to feel that somebody's being critical and feel offended or hurt by that, and then that solidifies that sense of me. And you say, well, why do I have to get caught in that anyway? I'm creating that. I can create another perception.
So we start to finish. Any other questions or comments? No, it's okay. I was thinking, if you need to be happy, concentrate, what if you're not happy?
Well, that's where you start putting conscious attention. Because, we're not unhappy all the time. If we were, we probably wouldn't be meditating. We'd probably be locked up somewhere. So the reality is that we do experience, times of well-being, of ease, of comfort, of happiness, and we often don't pay attention to it. We take it for granted, and then and again, it's the pain we obey, but whether it's conscious or unconscious. So it's what grabs our attention, and so that it's easy to completely overlook a time of well-being and happiness and just fixate on something that is unpleasant, uncomfortable, and again, it's sort of you get hijacked by that feeling, and you forget. Say, well, actually, my life isn't completely defined by my unhappiness and suffering, or it doesn't have to be, and you can start to pay, very conscious attention to that quality of well-being. And again, I think that's where mindfulness of the body is really helpful, because really trying to unravel the obsession with ourselves, like the story of me is so compelling. It's like, me and my story. It's just we're central players, and but the Ajahn Tomato has a great sort of one-liner. Every time I think of myself, I get depressed, and that is kind of true. But then you start. Again, that's where it's helpful to. Actually, there's causal processes going on, and these causes and conditions, and we can start looking at it from a perspective of, well, those causes and conditions that are conducive to well-being, that's worthy of attention. and to draw attention to that. And then again, mindfulness of the body, I think, is helpful for consciously relaxing, because there's a certain sort of habit patterns that we get locked into mentally, that it's helpful to physically relax, so you can sort of to be able to really let that go. It's helpful to cut through those sort of loops of attention that we keep finding ourselves in. So that conscious attention to a time of well-being, and that's also where you're sort of logically, and you realize just like generosity and giving. That has a universal acceptance as a good thing. Virtue has a universal acceptance as a good thing. Loving kindness and compassion is a universal acceptance as a good thing. So that putting that attention onto those kind of virtues, it's a source of well-being.
So that's a different kind of happiness than like falling in love. Because people don't come to the temple and do that when they're falling in love.
They disappear for a while.
Falling out of love and they're
usually back again.
Okay. Another question or comment? Don't be shy to speak up. You said you were new to Buddhism, right?
Yes. This is my second Dharma talk in my life.
Okay. What was the first one?
Look, this is the funny thing about it is that the very first one was in just outside of Ottawa in Canada, and the monk there reminds me so much of you, and your background seemed to be very similar as well. And
those
I
Canadians.
need to repeat this for the people outside.
oh,
Sure.
so it's mine's more of not a question so much as a comment, just an observation, and just oh wow.
Did you catch that side? You'll tell me later. Okay.
I'd like to know how you as a monk manage to remain detached from non-attachment.
How he as a monk remains detached from his non-attachment.
How he doesn't become attached to non-attachment.
How do you not become attached to non-attachment?
Well, it's easy. Because any attachment, you end up suffering from it. So anytime you find yourself, banging your head on a wall, then you just have to let go. And that's why, again, like that element of suffering is not just sort of misery and despair type of suffering, but it's sort of all the subtleties of how whether it's frustration, irritation, a sense of confusion, or seeing, because that sense of, because when you're attaching to something, even to something good, ends up complicating things, and it ends up being a source of frustration. So that you start learning how to pay attention to those signs of, and for me, that's one of the things where mindfulness of the body has been really helpful, because sometimes you start to feel it in the body, where you're starting to tense up, or you're starting to withdraw, or starting to there's an agitation that comes, and sometimes logically you're doing something good, or you're doing it right. You're being a good little Buddhist, and it's, but you're feeling frustration or irritation or something, and there's a disconnect, or so that you paying attention to the body helps to have an anchor for seeing what are the reactions that are actually taking place, not just on the logical, idealistic level of the mind, but underneath that. What's it feel like? What's the experience? And as you tune into those different levels, then you start to recognize that whenever you respond or react with attachment, desire in some way that's unskillful, not in accord with reality, then, or with truth, then there's something there's a dissonance that happens, and you have to pay attention to that.
We have a question about passion. I don't think it's a fruit. According to Buddhism, it's not good to be passionated about something too far. Great word. However, some things like being a writer, you need to have passion to be creative. So the question is, how could one balance the suffering caused by passion and the appropriate drive to be creative?
Well, I think one of the things is I mentioned it early on in the talk, there's actually two different words for desire, and so that the desire that leads to suffering in the scriptural language is tanha, and by its fundamental definition, it's desire that's imbued with greed, hatred, and delusion, so defilement in some way. But then there's also another word that is used for desire. It's called chanda. And chanda sometimes it can be used in a negative way, but mostly it's used in a positive way. And the word chanda as desire can be like motivation, interest, and chanda is the first quality that's needed. There's a set of teachings that the Buddha gave, which are called the 4 bases of success. So that quality of, say, desire, motivation, interest, passion, in terms of being successful at something, that's your opening doorway into it. The others, there's say desire, effort, application of mind, and then examination or reviewing, investigation. So that those are, because you have to investigate the results, review it, okay, is it working or not? And so that, say, that quality of passion, if it's acted on with effort, application of mind, that investigation and reviewing, and if it seems to be creating a positive result and something that's successful, then it'll feed back into that passion. What it'll do is it'll link back in to feed that motivation, that interest. So that, say, like, it depends what one's, whether it's art or writing or meditating. If one's just doing it out of duty or doing it out of some idea, that you think you should be doing or something like that, you lose interest after a while. It doesn't support itself. So then, but then it also has to have particularly from a Buddhist perspective, it needs to have some wholesome result. It has to be something that is conducive to well-being and happiness, because sometimes people are driven by their passion, and they drive themselves to more confusion and suffering. But one needs to be reviewing the results and saying, are the results satisfying? Are they supportive and conducive to my happiness and well-being?
I know in Mahayana they often say that Theravadins are afraid of desire, and Mahayana transforms desire into a tool of liberation.
Yes.
How do you reply to the Mahayana?
Well, the thing is that is how they define the Four Noble Truths and define tanha, because it's and then overlook the fact that there's this whole other teachings about the aspiration, motivation, and the elements of happiness and well-being that are. One thing is it's some of those teachings are there because there's an actual technical term I heard one time, I can't remember it right now, how you set up a sort of an opponent or a foe in order to be critical towards that opponent, and then that helps to raise yourself up. It's a very old ploy on the human realm. Yeah, that is, but there's an actual philosophical term.
Okay. Anyone else?
This is my first time here, but my mom's usually the regulars here. I was just wondering, I feel now we live in a really fast-paced world, and especially in the city of Bangkok. I was just wondering, how do you find the time to, eliminate all those things that are distracting you and come back into focus on things like this?
Okay. I won't tell them about your mom. How do you find the time in a busy world to come back and focus on the practice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, a lot of the finding the time is mainly by recognizing how you're using your time, so that again you have to make choices, and there's causes and conditions, so that how you make those choices and how you use time is you have to pay attention to, rather than just being dragged along by all of the things that are one's expected of, or that everything is happening around you. You're trying to do it. That usually keeps you busy, and then it's kind of endless. So you actually have to make skillful choices and reflect: how do I want to spend my time? How do I want to structure my life? And that takes a certain clarity and discipline, and then making choices. That where one's okay, and making a clear choice. Okay, I'm going to have to relinquish certain things because I see the value in this. Or if you're making a clear choice to engage in certain things, then rather than just being swept along by it and waiting for it to be over, which is how say, work or some activities we engage in, they end up sort of, we're on kind of automatic pilot and just waiting for it to be over and daydreaming. So they're really making those things into something that's very conscious and an opportunity for cultivating that awareness and mindfulness. Because mindfulness is not something that is limited to sitting meditation or being in a monastery or coming to a Dhamma talk. It's learning how to sustain attention with the very ordinary things that we engage in, and being able to carry that mindfulness with us. That being said, then some things are conducive to distraction, and you realize maybe I want to forego that for now. So that those choices start again. If the choices are saying, well, this is a choice between happiness and suffering, then it starts to become easier. Sort of really seeing clearly. Okay, well, I've got the opportunity to create more suffering for myself here, or I've got an opportunity to make more happiness and well-being over here. Well, I think I want to do this.
And there's lots of these opportunities on the website as well. So regular opportunities. We have a question. Very good. Okay. How does detachment work with things like family and relationships?
I think one of the things is recognizing that detachment isn't say a distancing from people or shutting anything out, but it's like having the clarity to make the choices so that one's relationships are based on very wholesome intention, or on virtue, on respect, on generosity and kindness. So when your relationships are based on those qualities, then those relationships they're very both satisfying and conducive to happiness for oneself, but they're also conducive to happiness for others. And that's and you can only make, again, it's the detachment that helps you to have the clarity to see, well, what is it that's really conducive to real well-being, and recognizing that there are these fundamental virtues that are conducive to happiness.
Talking of fundamental virtues, in the 5 precepts, the first one is not to kill. And you mentioned that love, kindness and attention are a source of well-being.
Mm-hmm.
However, when this person was in Nepal, they saw a sacrifice of an animal at the Kali temple. The people there seemed to be very contented and happy. And this question, I think, is because of their love and fervour for God.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of attachment enough to bring peace and love to that community and those people? And the 5 precepts seem to help people live in harmony, but so does the clinging to the ritual.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a few sort of layers there.
There's a few layers there.
Yeah. And I'll try to address that. But there's a sense of again, where there's a certain belief system functions, and you're happy because of that, because you're following a belief system, and sacrificing an animal, but nobody asks the animal how they feel about it. They might not be so happy, and then Also, one of the things that happens in terms of the fundamental 5 precepts, just the act of engaging in taking of life, you have to sort of leap over a certain barrier of conscience or sensitivity in order to take some other being's life, and that isn't very helpful for brightness of mind in the long term. So that's an aspect of and of course there's all sorts of, how do you say, again, like causes and conditions that make things not always straightforward. So that sense of, for a Hindu to witness a sacrifice, they feel it's great merit and all love of God, but it's also, one of the reasons why the Buddha, he came from a culture that grew up in Vedic sacrifice, and he wasn't supportive of that, because it's, again, that sense of just fundamentally in the nature of the mind, there's a stain in the brightness of mind that occurs in having to take life or engaging in the taking of life. And then, particularly if it's in human life, I think it's even way more complicated. But it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't experience happiness, but it's, people experience happiness in all sorts of different ways, and that's why it's helpful to have that reflection and investigation and boundaries to reflect from, so that one can start to sort of tease out some of the, the different ways that as human beings we seek happiness, and because we seek happiness in some pretty complicated ways that end up in our own suffering and others suffering. So it's, there's also, I think in Thailand, it's a Buddhist country. The first precept is non-killing, and God, so much meat eaten in this country. And when there's ceremonies or sort of merit making, I remember monks giving Dhamma talks, all of the various different markets and animal realms, they're not very happy when Katina comes around, or that's sort of one of the big festivals of the year. All the other festivals, they're not very happy, and so that it's it is one has to sort of be investigating what is it that's the underlying nature of the mind. And you see, harmlessness just brings a sense of brightness to the mind. And, you refine that, and it's, choices that you make. And you recognize that it has an effect.
My Abhidharma teacher says you sacrifice your relations. One last question, I think, before we go. One last comment.
I'm just going to ask, I looked around, but is there not a box somewhere, a donation box?
Right on the second desk outside the back end. Yes. And those donations are going towards the Abhidharma Temple.
Was that the last? Can I ask a quick one?
No, you can have a quick one.
A few of my women friends have a problem with Buddhism because they feel they're treated as second-class citizens. And I know they would
So some Western women feel that women are treated as second-class citizens in Thailand.
No, in Buddhism.
In Buddhism,
All except Zen Buddhism, I think.
except for Zen Buddhism. Okay. I'm glad you're answering that.
Yes, well, I mean, it's a problem. In terms of how, because there's Buddhism, and then there's the cultures that Buddhism has grown up in, so that those two things end up getting mixed together. And once you have 2,500 years of culture and Buddhism, and even in the time of the Buddha, the Buddha grew up in a certain culture, so that there are cultural ways of relationships that have been established over time, and that is, you realize that it's very difficult to have a human institution that isn't conditioned by the cultures that it grows up in. And certainly the relationship, say, for women is more difficult, and certainly in Theravada, then it's, but also I think in general in most of Buddhist, because it's just you go into a Buddhist monastery and your Buddha is male, and you go to these male monks, and you go to there's banks of maleness all around, so that it's not, it's a hurdle, especially for Westerners to jump over. It's not that easy, but it's also helpful to go back to the principles. It's like being able to say, there's this culture that it grows up in, but then the Buddha did have this vision that we can transcend, let's say, our personal, either male or female foundations of how our biases, and that the nature of, say, of the pure mind is it's not male, it's not female, and that's actually and even as in the Thai language, when you talk about, it's like the sort of like there's three different characteristics of, say, the male sex, the female sex, and the monastic. เพศผู้ชายเพศผู้หญิงเพศสมณะเพศนักบวช So it's just sort of, you're trying to realize, there is something that is beyond that, so that and then the fundamental nature of mind isn't entangled in those biases of culture or male or female, and that's a very high ideal, and of course human institutions and cultures, they don't work in that way, so it's there. And I think one of the things is by being, rather than trying to say it's not there, or trying to find out, or trying to come up with some way of rationalizing it, sort of, this is a problem in the human condition, and it's a source of suffering. And how do we address that suffering? And it may not be through, because institutions are sometimes very intractable, but how we relate to them, we can work with that.
and some of the doctrine, but possibly maybe not do all the rituals and participate to the
So anybody can do the meditation. I'm just repeating where I said. Anybody can do the meditation.
And they can also do it very deep. They can read.
Right.
And you can kind of separate it from. I believe I'm looking to you to see it. I'm not.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise, maybe some people say that you don't know that.
Yeah.
You're not very.
I'm not repeating that.
Anybody can be a Buddhist.
Anybody can do it. It's certainly my temple. If you want meditation, you go to see the nuns. So it's very much alive and in
But I
practice.
think what distinguishes it from other practices that you can come through the practice, you don't need to.
And I think the rituals is not really, it's only ordination of monks. Otherwise, there's no real rituals that we do that the monks do.
Yeah, but I mean, it's in your face a lot. You live in Thailand, so
Okay, I think that's all we have time for. I think that's going to be around for a short while, just in case anyone has certain other issues. Are these books going to be given? What's happening with these? Nothing. Okay. Yes? Oh, the chanting books, okay. So thank you all for coming. And we have a talk next week in the Buddhadasa Independent Archives, GIA. Next week we've got a retreat coming up in January, and thanks for Rinpoche and all the others. So keep an eye on the website. Nice to see you all again. So, okay. We have a big hand. Just 1 minute while I do the chat.
Bye.